family mode.
Hi everyone, this is just a quick audio check. If you can hear me, could you please type yes in the chat box? Thank you. Sounds all yes. Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the live webinar on how to use coaching skills to have more impact as a leader by Mr. Andrew Neitlich from the Center for Executive Coaching. This webinar is arranged by Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE. I'm Ali Jafri, representing MILE, and will be moderating this webinar. Just a quick introductory word about the speaker. Mr. Andrew Neitlich is the founder and director of the Center for Executive Coaching, a leading training and certification firm for coaches around the world. Over the past 2 decades, he has trained and certified over 1,000 executive coaches in 32 countries, including professionals who have worked at Coca-Cola, the National Basketball Association, the United States Marines, Lauren, Flack, Deloitte, Microsoft, Kaiser Permanente, Brown University, the United Nations, and Partners Healthcare. He also leads his own executive coaching practice with a focus on leaders in dynamic growth companies and companies experiencing change. He's the author of 3 books in the best-selling Guerrilla Marketing series, as well as the book Coach, Elegant Leadership, and the Way to Coach Executives. He received his MBA from Harvard Business School and distinction in lives and lives in Sarasota, Florida with his family. Now this presentation by Mr. Andrew Neitlich will be for about 35 to 40 minutes, so we request you to please hold your questions till he finishes presentation, and then we'll open the floor for question and answers in the end. Now let me go straight and make him a presenter, so please bear with me for a few seconds. Hello Andrew, how are you? I've just sent you a request to accept and show your screen.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Could you run it in? All right, great. So we have your audio and we can see your presentation. It's all optimized. The floor is all yours. Please proceed with the presentation.
Coaching conversations, especially when it comes to implementation. You can't just tell a client to implement. They don't do it. You have to use coaching. You have to explore. You have to inquire. You have to figure out where they're at and how they're thinking to get them to implement. But coaching is not consulting. One of the biggest mistakes that leaders make is they're very directive. They think they're coaching when they're really just telling or consulting. Coaching is not training. However, research shows, and this just makes intuitive, obvious sense, that training plus coaching reinforces results. We know that in any training class, people typically forget what they've learned, 85% of what they've learned, at least according to one study, within 2 weeks. That's how good training is. But if you add coaching to reinforce results over the next 4 to 6 months, you typically get a 4 times improvement on retention. Coaching is certainly not therapy, although some coaches, the way they do it, it feels like therapy. So some bad coaching can feel like therapy. Therapy is about going to the past. It's about digging deep into trauma. Often therapy comes from a model where the person is diseased. That's not what coaching is. With coaching, we're talking about healthy people who are already effective, and we're moving forward. We're talking about how do we move forward. We're not going to ask about their parents. We're not going to ask about their past. We really are having a conversation about how to be really effective in the future. Coaching isn't facilitation, although certainly facilitators use conversations that are similar to coaching in group settings to explore issues. And also coaching is not mediation. But again, there are a lot of similarities. There's a lot of overlap because mediators use conversations similar to coaching. to find common ground between or among parties. Okay, so there's some of these are closer to coaching than others, but I just want to give you a sense of different types of conversations and approaches that are out there. So what are the benefits of coaching? There's been a lot of research about benefits of coaching. Let's just talk at a high level first. If you're a good coach inside an organization and you coach your employees, you have the opportunity to develop new leaders and build the strength of your team. That's ultimately what a good coach does. They develop more leaders. You can create a culture focused on leadership development in your organization, so you create a stronger organization. You become a more effective leader. Instead of directing or micromanaging, as many leaders, so-called leaders, unfortunately still do, you're using coaching to help others come up with their own answers and build their own capacity. You're giving your team mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Those are 3 words in Daniel Pink's book, Drive, D-R-I-V-E. And according to him, the perfect role in the workplace, especially with millennials these days, has mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Purpose meaning the person in the role feels good about it. There's a reason why they're doing it. Autonomy means they're in control. And mastery means they can get better in their job. They have the opportunity to keep improving. Well, coaching is all about all 3 of those things. You're asking questions to help the person figure out how they fit in, what their purpose is. You're giving them the autonomy to figure things out on their own. And you're helping them master and become better at what they're doing. If you're a good coach, you're going to reduce your time spent solving other people's problems. And that way you could focus more on strategic issues. And if you're trying to move up in your organization, you're going to be freed up to do so, and you'll have stronger leaders who support you so that you can work on the things you need to work on while you look to higher positions. If you're the CEO or you're running the organization, you can spend more time as a CEO and less time as a firefighter. So ultimately, you're advancing your own career because you gain leverage through your team, and because developing leaders is really one of the key, if not the key competency of a C-level executive. So this is why knowing how to coach is super important. By the way, it's also a great encore career. At the Center for Executive Coaching, we get tons of people who, after they're done with their executive and management roles, decide they want to be coaches. There have been lots of studies about coaching and its results. You can go to the International Coach Federation. They often have summaries of the latest research. Most recent research that I've looked at shows increased loyalty and retention by those being coached. That makes sense, because if someone's being coached and the organization invests in coaching, it tells them, hey, you matter. We want you here. So they feel more loyal. They stick around more. As I said, it reinforces results from training. We see improved relationships and teamwork, reduced conflict. That's up, down, and across the organization. We see resolution of business issues more effectively. So you'll see improved customer service, improved quality, change is accelerated, sales gets increased. Why? Because there's conversations happening, deeper conversations, better problem solving, better creativity, more innovation. There's improved productivity. You get acceleration in helping qualified employees and high potentials reach the next level for promotion. And in the case of people who are really talented but have some rough spots, coaching is a great way to eliminate behaviors or blind spots that could derail their career. And here in the United States right now, that's especially the case. We're having a slew of news about people with terrible behaviors and their careers are ended. If you're reading the news over here, you'll see that throughout Hollywood and in many business situations too. Well, it turns out that coaching has a methodology called behavioral coaching that can help with that type of thing. So there's tangible results that happen with coaching as well. Now, the trick, if you're a manager, is that there are times to do this and times not to. Let's just start with the right-hand column that you see on your screen, which are times not to use coaching. If you just want the person to get it done, don't coach them. Just tell them what you want them to do. Be directive, right? Coaching is not a time to sit down and figure it out through open-ended questions, right? If you want it done, just say, I want it done. Here's what I need you to do. If you need to be directive, don't torture them with the Socratic method of having them figure it out. This isn't a law school. You're not a professor in a law school. You know, if you need to be directive and tell someone or give someone tough feedback, just give them the tough feedback. Don't torture them. I worked with a client who was trying to be a coach, and when we interviewed his employees, he thought he was a great coach. The employees called what he did torturous self-realization. And what they said was he would spend 30 minutes trying to coach them, and I put coach in, in quotes, when from their perspective, all he was doing was playing a game of guess what I'm thinking. And he'd just kind of ask questions until they could guess what he really wanted, what he was thinking, what the right answer is. That's not when you coach. So you don't coach when you're not willing to be flexible on the what you want or how you want it done. Coaching is perfect for long and short-term development conversations. So when you're sitting down with somebody about where they want to go in their career or in the organization and how to get there, it's great when you're preparing somebody or a team for high-stakes conversations. So if you're about to go into a negotiation or a conflict, or you need to influence somebody, coaching is a wonderful tool to prepare before going in. So if you have an employee who's going into a really high-stakes conversation, coaching is a great way to ask and inquire and play it out. If you have an employee whose performance has slipped for some reason, you know they're really good, they have incredible potential, but their attitude has slipped. Coaching is a wonderful way to figure out what's going on and how you can get them re-engaged. And if you know what you want done, but you're flexible in how it gets done, coaching can be a great way to work with the employee to say, look, here's what we both agree we want. How do we get there? And then coaching is a great way to have the employee come up with their ideas about what will work for their style and what they're comfortable doing. So those are just some times when you should use coaching and certainly when you should not. So let's now move on. Now that we've done the definitions, I'd like to move on to the fundamental coaching conversation. It's called active inquiry. It will sound easy to do, but I've trained well over 1,000 coaches, many from executive and management backgrounds, and I have to tell you, it takes a couple of days to do this well, because you're all used to, as was I when I started, and I still fall into this trap, we're used to directing, to telling people what to do, to knowing the answer. And so active inquiry can be a little bit tricky. So when done right, what this conversation does is build trust. It opens a window so that you see the person you're coaching's thinking and worldview. You understand how they think about an issue. And you identify ideas that the individual will actually implement. All it is, at its simplest, is really powerful, open-ended questions that you ask that move the conversation forward. That's all it is. And then you listen. And what the individual tells you, their responses guide the conversation. If you listen really well, they'll tell you what to ask next. And this doesn't mean that you're passive. Okay, you're asking great questions to move the conversation forward. And at the same time, of course, you're an expert and you have experience. So after the individual has any insights, then by all means, you can say, listen, do you mind if I share my own insight based on what you've said? They say yes, you share your insight, and then you say, so where do you want to go from here? And so active inquiry starts with simple questions, right? When you're first learning to coach, there's some simple questions you can ask, and then you can add coaching methodologies and frameworks. The idea behind this is that most managers and executives, yourself, myself included, are pretty full when it comes to our brains. You could say we're pretty arrogant. We already know the answer, right? And what this type of conversation does is it lets the other person vent. If you think of all of us as steam boilers, right? We're full of steam. Active inquiry lets the other person blow off steam. The steam empties, we have space, and now the other person has space to listen, to create, to come up with new ideas, and even to hear what you have to say. That's one of the benefits of this coaching conversation, but you also have the opportunity to hear how they're thinking about things and help them move forward. So let me give you some simple questions for active inquiry. You don't always use these, but just so you know, it's an open-ended question. It's not a closed-ended question. It shouldn't be something that's yes or no. You're not suggesting things. You're not hiding suggestions. But, you know, these are really high-level generic questions, right? Real coaching will get deeper. But, you know, in an ideal world, what would you make happen? That's a great coaching question. What are some small steps towards the goal that can get some momentum going? What ideas do you have to solve this issue and move forward? That's one of the best questions a manager can ask someone. What's in your control in regards to this situation that might help? What are some things that you've already tried that are working and that you can build on? What are your talents and skills, and how can you apply those in this situation? Tell me a situation where you've resolved tough challenges like this in the past. How can you take those same abilities and apply them here? Notice, we're not going to the past. We're talking about the past only in regards of how to apply it to the future. Who can you go to for additional support? Where can you go for additional information? If you could make any request to address this situation, what would it be and to whom? What do you need to stop tolerating in this situation? That's one of my favorite coaching questions. A lot of time leaders and managers tolerate things. In fact, I challenge you right now to think about one thing you're tolerating, one person who's acting out or not performing right, one situation you don't like. What are you tolerating right now in your role that you should stop tolerating after this webinar? And what behaviors or attitudes do you need to start doing, do more, stop doing, or do less? Okay, so none of these are just generic questions, right? It's not like you have a script. I'm just giving you examples of good active inquiry. So active inquiry is a three-step process. You know, first, there's actually a fourth step. The first step is you set a goal. You know, so your employee is there, or whoever you're coaching, your colleague, your client, if you're an external coach. And, you know, what I'll say is, what's going to make this the best use of your time today? You know, what outcome do you want? They'll tell me. We'll make sure there's a clear goal. Then I'll say, you know, what we're going to do is a process called active inquiry. I'm going to ask you some open-ended questions to explore the issue with the intent of having you gain insights to resolve it. At the end, I'll ask you what conclusions and next steps you've drawn, and perhaps ask permission to share a few of my own. Then we go from there. Does that sound okay? And then we do it. You know, typically a good session, 10 to 15 minutes before we can see where we're at. And then we close it out. I'll say, you know, so what insights did you have? What did you find most valuable? What are next steps? I want them to be accountable for doing something as a result of the conversation. And then if I have an insight, I might say, do you mind if I share an insight? And then based on all of that, I'll say, so where do we go from here? You know, what do you want to talk about now? They might say, nothing, I'm good. I want to go do what I said I was going to do. Or they might want to talk about something else. That's typically how a coaching conversation works. Let me tell you about the coaching process. By the way, as you know, there'll be questions, plenty of time for questions at the end. So you see a diagram of the coaching process here. I'll take you through all of the steps quickly. But basically what we're looking at is, first we establish that somebody is coachable. If they are, we do some contracting to, you know, primarily setting a goal. And then you see the circle on the right. We're going to coach, track, and adjust on the way to success. We'll follow up to make sure that things actually happened. And then we work on the next issue in an ongoing relationship. That's basically what coaching is. Let's just talk about it. The most important thing in the process, the most important part of the process, and the biggest issue with coaching is coachability. Fundamentally, we cannot coach someone who's not coachable. And so you can remember the 2 P's. There are 2 P's that must be in place for you to be able to coach anyone. There must be a problem or pain, and there must be permission, right? None of us want coaching. Just like we don't want to go to the doctor. And we only go to the doctor when we're in pain and when we give the doctor permission to examine us. Same thing with coaching. Nobody's going to want coaching unless there's a problem and unless they give you permission. You can go to them and say, may I have permission to coach you? Or they come to you and say, will you coach me? If you think someone has a problem and you ask can I coach you? And they say no, and you coach them anyway. That's not coaching. They won't be open to it. That's called nagging. Perhaps some of you have tried to do this in your family, maybe in your marriage. You've tried to offer coaching to a spouse, and they haven't given you permission. I ask you, how does that go? It doesn't go very well because it's not coaching. You can't coach someone who's not coachable. So this is the doorway. This is the gateway to coaching. If it shuts down, coaching stops. You really have to ask yourself, is it you? Are you doing something wrong with your coaching? Or is it the other person? Are they just distracted? Have you pushed too far? Are they uncomfortable? And you have to stop the coaching and say, what's going on? Should we reconvene? Etc. So this is the number one issue. This is the kryptonite to Superman. This is the problem with coaching, is you can't force coaching on someone who doesn't want to be coached. Step two, we contract. Every session you begin, if you have a longer term engagement, it doesn't matter. We need to know the point A to point B. We must have a very clear goal in mind. Good coaching is about getting results. And that's one of the things that sets coaching apart from therapy or any other conversation. I don't want to coach anybody unless there's a really amazing goal that they can achieve. So before we start coaching, I want to say, what will make this a great coaching relationship? If it's a longer term coaching relationship, if it's just a short session or a session within the relationship, I'll say, what would make this the best hour of your week? What do you want to achieve by the end of this? Or what will make this a great conversation? So you have to really be clear on point A to point B. And excuse me, if you're an internal coach or doing a longer term coaching conversation, there's some other points I won't spend too much time on here, but we have to know, what's confidential and what's not. That's really important in the coaching world. If you're going to be a coach, confidentiality is critical. People will not open up to you if they feel like you're going to take what is said and share it with others. The more you create a sense of confidentiality and safety in the coaching conversation, the more they'll open up to you and the more results you can get. I want to know how long is the coaching engagement? How often do we meet? What's in scope and what's not? What do we discuss and what don't we? And I also want to be clear if I'm a manager about the boundaries between management and coaching. So you might say, well, this is a coaching conversation. I'd like you to see me as a coach here. Sometimes that can help too. All right, but the most important thing is the scope. If you're a manager, you really want to be clear, where are we going here? If this is a career development conversation, at the end of this career development conversation, where would you like to be? What would you like to have achieved in terms of thinking about your career and where you're going, for instance? Okay, and then we can assess the situation, sometimes just by asking questions. If you're going to be a formal coach, you might have some assessment tools. Okay, so we inquire, we explore. You can use your own experience and instincts to assess where the person you're coaching is at. I really like the 360-degree verbal assessment. Again, external coaches and internal coaches who are full-time tend to do this more, where you might talk to a few people and get a sense of how the person you're coaching comes across. There's off-the-shelf assessments that are highly validated statistically that can give you a sense of the other person. There are performance reviews and job descriptions. If you're the manager, you already know about those that can assess the other person. You might look at the strategic plan the other person has and how they fit in. And you can, of course, observe and shadow the other person to see how they actually perform. So there's all sorts of ways of assessing the other person depending on the situation. If it's about their time, they can do a time study, and we can look at how they're using their time. They can track their time. Okay? And then the bulk of what you do is coaching, tracking, and adjusting. We're just coaching them to move them from where they are to where they want to be. We're tracking results. Every good coach tracks results. If they're changing a behavior, we might put in place a feedback process from peers to see how they're improving on their behavior. We might track specific business outcomes. If they're trying to be more confident, we might track a scale of 1 to 10 about how they feel, how much confidence they feel, for instance, about public speaking. And we adjust the approach as needed, with the individual's input and to balance the need for results with the quality of the relationship. In other words, we don't want to push too hard or not push hard enough. So we're always adjusting the coaching. We're asking the client, how are we doing? That's basically what happens in the process. When we succeed, we celebrate. We celebrate small steps and milestones. That's another great benefit of coaching, because organizations don't do this enough anymore. We challenge the individual to acknowledge his or her role in achieving success, because people don't do that anymore either. Now, when we achieve something, we say, it was going to happen anyway. As a coach, you can really help people feel good about what they did and the difference they've made. Then we follow up. With coaching, what's interesting is people still, if you conclude a positive session, we still want to follow up. Here in the USA with automobiles, we think of the 10,000-mile checkup, right? After we buy a car or have a car repaired, we still have a 10,000-mile checkup to make sure it's still good. You do the same thing with coaching. After your employee has a result, we check in with them. We say, how's it going? And if results are not sticking, we help them get back on track. Finally, if you're a manager, you want to have a long-term relationship, help them develop, so we figure out the next issue to work on. And that depends on their career development plan. And as the individual grows, their part of the organization should grow and new issues should emerge. So that's the coaching process. Most of it is coaching. But again, it's really important to set goals, make sure the person's coachable, and have that long-term relationship in mind. All right, so let me give you some examples. Coaching is great for a variety of examples. I'm just going to give you some high-level coaching questions for specific situations. So if an employee comes and wants a development plan, and I hope each of you in your organizations has a really good development planning process where everybody is rewarded for developing employees and moving them up to the next level. But there should be a process where people are accountable for asking these questions and coaching people to the next level. Questions like, so what are your career goals? What performance metrics or outcomes do you need to demonstrate to get there? Which skills will help you get there? Which assignments and experiences? Which professional relationships? Which training and educational opportunities? And what's the action plan to make it happen? All right, so that's coaching. Now, these are high-level questions. When your client or your employee answers them, we'll drill down with more questions. Career development is one of the most important coaching conversations you can have for using coaching as a leader or a manager. What about time management and overwhelm? Overwhelm is a huge issue in organizations now. At the Center for Executive Coaching, we have a really nice toolkit and methodology that goes into depth to help people get on top of their priorities and overcome overwhelm. Basically, the highest level questions are, first we ask the coaching question, how do you spend your time now? And we drill down to understand exactly how the person is spending their time. And we look at it. We look at, what do you notice about how you're spending your time? What are areas that are not very strategic for you? Where do you have opportunities to delegate? What are you doing that's just a waste of time? What are you doing that are things that don't need to be done or don't need to be done as well as you're doing them? What are things that you could do more efficiently? So we go through that assessment and then we say, so what does your ideal day and week look like? How many hours should you be working? How should you be spending your time ideally? And then finally, what strategies will get you there? And that's really the process. How can you set boundaries? How can you negotiate or make requests to change your role? Where can you say no? How can you delegate? How can you change your team? How can you be less of a perfectionist? What other limiting beliefs might you have that are getting in the way of your use of time? How can you get more efficient? How can you better use technology? What other ideas do you have to get you there? And so on. So time management is a great type of situation or challenge that someone might have where coaching can help. Leading a team is another one. You might have employees or colleagues who are leading a team. They need coaching all the time. It's really hard to lead a good team. Some good coaching questions might be, aside from tell me what's going on with the team, where do you want it to be? But, how clear is the team's goal? Tell me about the team's goal. How much alignment and commitment is there to achieve the goal? How clear are roles and responsibilities? What contingencies are built into the team's work plan? What's missing in terms of trust and support among team members? You know, if I were to interview each member of the team, what requests do you think they'd have of the team leader or of each other or of people outside the team? What's missing from effective communication among team members? What's missing when it comes to the project management triangle of resources, quality, and time? Now, these questions are a little bit more directive. And again, you can back up to higher level and just listen. Just, you know, tell me what's going on. Where do you want the team to be? Where is it now? What's the gap? How do we fill the gap? What are your ideas? That's the power of coaching. You just go where they are. You know, you don't have to go with a script or a diagnostic list like I have here. Engaging and mobilizing employees is another big one. We know from the annual Gallup survey around the world, employees are simply not engaged. I mean, in fact, the numbers are horrible. More employees are actually actively disengaged than are engaged. So I do a lot of my coaching here after an employee engagement survey has happened. One of the best ways to improve engagement is right at the manager level, coaching managers to focus more on developing relationships with their employees and engage them better. So, you know, we can talk about some coaching questions here. Which people on your team are challenges to engage? Tell me about each person. You know, what drives them? What's their style? What are their motivations and aspirations? Basically, you can't engage somebody if you don't know them and what drives them. What expectations do you need to set for each team member? What feedback do you need to provide? What message or messages do you need to convey? What's the right leadership approach for each person? You know, a lot of managers only have one leadership style. They don't realize that they have to vary their leadership style depending on where each person is at in terms of their performance, their attitude, their potential trajectory in the organization. Who do you need to acknowledge or reward? And my favorite coaching question here, what do you have to do to better earn the right to lead? And again, we would drill down. This is very superficial. I'm just giving you a sense of how coaching can help in different situations. Resolving a conflict is another one. Two people come to you with a conflict, or one person. You know, what are some coaching questions there? How willing are you to resolve the conflict? Where are you willing to be flexible? Where are you not? Where are you willing to accept responsibility for the conflict, and where are you not? How does the other person think about the conflict? What do you think they would need in order to be willing to resolve it? What's important to know about the other person's style? What about their motivations, aspirations, and job? What's the best influence strategy to resolve the conflict? You know, what's the best approach? What objections might that other person raise? What's the best way to address these? And let's role play. Coaching is great for role play. For two people to come together, you know, the coach to pretend to be the other person before your client, before your employee or colleague goes into a meeting with another person and blows it in a high stakes conversation. Coaching is a great way to get out all the bad things that can happen in a real meeting. So also, it's important to note that coaching can support organizational development initiatives. All right, I get called in a lot as an external coach. I know a lot of internal coaches. And if you know how to coach, coaching conversations are terrific when an organization is trying to accelerate change, create a high performance culture, do any kind of performance improvement initiative, integrate a merger or acquisition, and develop high potential leaders. Why? Because in all of those cases, coaching as a conversation brings people together. It helps people learn about how others are thinking. It's a more collaborative style and approach to getting things done. But it still holds people accountable for results. So coaching, again, it's just a really important tool for managers and leaders to have. Okay, you have, I hope in your console that you can download a handout called the Leaders Dashboard. I just want to briefly take you through it. It's a one-page tool, and you know, in the few minutes we have before I'm going to take questions, I encourage you just to do this as an exercise for yourself. Another way you can use coaching is to create simple tools that your employee can do. One would be a career development plan. Here we have a higher level one called the Leader's Dashboard. I use this with all of my high level clients before I meet with them to coach. And what it does is it challenges you on one page to get out the most important things going on in your role. In this case, we're looking at your organization. You could do this for your career as well. So you could do this for you personally. Here, the example I've given you is for an organization. And I would challenge you after this webinar, I'd like to see if you could do it. On one page, could you get down your vision for your organization, your mission? And by the way, definitions are on the document. Your no more than 3 to 5 key values, your edge for the organization. In other words, what sets your organization apart from others like it? What makes it unique and better? Up to 3 performance initiatives that you're doing. No more than 3. You see, many people have too many initiatives, and so they're running around and dabbling. They don't get enough done. They're spread too thin. You know, what's the 80-20 rule in terms of where you should be spending your time? The 20% of initiatives that should take up 80% of your time, so that when you look at this every morning, you're focused, you're ready to go. You know the 3 initiatives that matter most to your performance. Similarly, what are the 3 performance metrics that matter most for your role? What are the top 5 to 10 professional relationships? Like, these are the relationships you better manage if you want to be successful. Certainly your direct manager, some key employees, maybe some clients, some colleagues. These are the people you really want to make sure you nurture that relationship. Okay, and finally, you know, what are the top opportunities you have for professional development, or if you're doing it for the organization, your organization has to improve its capacity and be stronger. Okay, but I just wanted to give you one tool that you can look at. We certainly don't have time to go through it today, but it's a really big challenge. A lot of executives struggle to get down these very seemingly simple questions on one page. Sometimes they don't know their vision. Sometimes they don't know what sets their organization apart. If they do it for themselves, they don't know why they're unique and better. They don't know their own edge. Some, like in healthcare, I have a lot of healthcare organizations that have to list like 30 priorities, 30 initiatives. They can't get down to 3 or even 5. They don't know their performance metrics. And so I challenge you to do that. All right, and I think you'll see this is where a coach can be really helpful to get you grounded. Imagine being focused every day, laser focused. This is what research shows helps people be effective these days, is doing less, setting boundaries, and knowing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. The leaders who are most successful can get this exercise done. So I leave you with that as a challenge, and I hope you see why coaching is important, in fact, a crucial skill for every leader and manager to have. And at this point, I think we've hit the 40-minute mark. I'd be delighted to take any questions that any of you might have.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, for a very intriguing presentation. And folks, we are now open for question and answers. So if you have any questions, you could either insert it in the question box, chat box, or raise your hand if you want to talk directly with Andrew. Let me go to the question box. There are a couple of them already posted. First one from Stephen Lechensky is, how do you handle and when necessary terminate a coaching engagement when the client is resisting or not fulfilling their commitments?
Yeah, great question. Well, you know, it's really interesting because what a junior coach will do when a client is not fulfilling what they're supposed to be doing is point to the client and say, this is a bad client. He's not coachable. What you really want to start with is, am I doing anything right? Is it me? First, we start with, is it me? So I'm going to have that discussion with the client and say, listen, you know, maybe you haven't shown up for a couple of sessions. What's going on here? Is this relationship important to you? Do you want to be coached? And so, you know, that's the first step, is to look at, is there anything I can do to improve? Then we're going to recontract, and I'm going to say, you know, you agreed to come to these. This is, you know, is the goal important to you? Is this still something you want to do? If they say yes, and they're still not coming, they're not, you know, they're just talking. It feels like all they want to do is to talk intellectually, and they're not going to do anything about it. And they stop showing up, or they're coming late. You know, you just have to decide whether it's worth it for you or not. And sometimes you just have to say, listen, if you don't come to the next session, I'm going to take that as your sign to me, your way of communicating to me that you really don't want to be coached, and let's just stop the session. And that's how you do it. I've been blessed lately. When I first started, I had more of those. So something's changed in how I come across as a coach, that people who come to me now are super serious. And I think it's more about how I present up front, because I ask some real tough questions up front and really screen my clients up front, and won't take anyone, because I'm an external coach, I don't take anyone unless we can agree that there's a 5 to 10 times return on my fees and our time together in terms of the goal they set. So one way I've avoided this from happening is I charge a lot more money, right? Because money is a commitment, and make sure there's a really big goal. If there's not a big goal and something that's really important to them, they will tend to lose interest and focus. So that helps too, is what you do up front.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have another one from Fadi Al-Khudari. The question is, could you please elaborate more about the third point on when should not to coach?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So again, there are many different styles for a manager, right? And here, let me refer, in fact, to Ken Blanchard's 1 Minute Manager, an old classic. He would say you can look at skill and will of an employee, right? If you imagine a 2x2 grid with the x-axis of skill and the y-axis of will or attitude, right? So if you have an employee who doesn't have the skill and doesn't have the will, like they don't want to do the job, what do? You either fire them, maybe they have another talent that can be used elsewhere in the organization, so you redeploy them, or if they have a crucial role and you can't get rid of them, you have no choice but to direct and inspect and micromanage. That's not a coaching situation, right? That's where you just tell them what you need. Similarly, let's say you have like a millennial who has a great attitude, but just joined the company and their mom or dad is calling, which happens here in the United States, it's crazy, and saying, hey, when's my son or daughter going to be CEO? Hopefully next week. It's crazy. That's not really a coaching situation. That's where you sit the person down and say, look, we love your attitude. You're great. I'm going to put you on a training plan, but I have to manage your expectations. You have to understand that you're going to spend about 2 years in this role, and then you move up to the next role, and you have to be a little bit patient. Again, that's not necessarily coaching. That's managing expectations. If someone, so in Blanchard's framework, the two places where you might coach are, number one, where someone's ready to move up. They have a good attitude, they have skill, and they have a trajectory. They're ready to move up to the next role. You could say to them, listen, I think I can mentor and coach you to get promoted because I think you're ready. Would you be interested in that? That's number one. And number two, maybe someone is down. Their attitude changed. They used to be great in their job, and they have the skill for sure, but something happened. They need to be re-engaged. That's a good coaching conversation too, to sit them down and say, look, I'm concerned. You used to be a super employee. Something's changed in your attitude. What's going on? That might be a coaching conversation. And similarly, any kind of development, professional development conversation about, how can you be better? How can we get this done? Would also help. But essentially, you do not coach if you already know the answer, you want it done, you know the how, you're not flexible. That's not coaching. That's more being directive, giving direct feedback, etc. So you just have to realize coaching is just one of many types of conversations a good leader would have. There's a time for it and a time not for it as a leader.
All right, thank you very much. We have another caller who's raised a hand, so let me go straight unmute. Mr. Hood Ali Darus. Brother Hood, could you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Are we going to get a copy of this presentation?
Yes, Mr. Hood, yes, you will be receiving post this session. Any other questions you have?
Thank you very much. It's very nice. Andrew, how are you doing? Are you okay?
I am outstanding. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice talking to you again.
Pleasure.
Go ahead, Ali.
All right, so you don't have a question. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hood. So let me go to another caller, we have one from a question from Nigeria, from Tandeka Malala. The question is, I did not quite understand when one can use the leader's dashboard.
Oh yeah, there are a number of times to use the leader's dashboard. First of all, if you're an external coach, I use this to assess the client. So when I want to assess a leader, right up front, I'll do a what's called a 360-degree verbal assessment. That's when I'll talk to 12 to 15 people who work with my client and ask them some questions about, what do you do well? What could you do better? I'll do an off-the-shelf assessment, like an assessment that the client fills in to understand their thinking styles and their behavioral traits. And then I'll do this because this gives me a sense right away of the client's most important issues. Their vision, mission, values, their top performance initiatives, their top relationships. And then we can use this throughout the coaching to see how they're doing on their key initiatives and key performance metrics and see what's changed. So that's one way to use it. A second way is if you have someone you're working with and they're overwhelmed, like they're all over the place, they're scattered, they don't know what, and this happens all the time. They have too many priorities, they're juggling. I use this to get them focused. It's a really good tool to get somebody focused because on one page, they're forced to write down their most important priorities and their most important highest level aspirations, their vision, their mission, their values. And sometimes I'll have them do it in two ways, as I said, one for their own career and one in relation to the organization they're running. So their vision for their career would be on one page and then their vision for their organization. And then we can compare the 2 pages also to see how aligned they are personally with their organization. So it's also a nice tool to look at how aligned they are with the role that they're in. I've done this with one client, and he decided he needed to leave his organization. His values were just so different from the organization he was in. So that's another way to use it. So it's a very versatile tool. There are many ways to use it, but perhaps the best for those on this webinar is just try it and see how focused and grounded you are and how well you know the answers to these, because it can really help you get grounded on what matters most. That's how I would use it.
Thank you very much. We have another one from Joe Simpson. The question is, what do you do when a coachee really needs coaching, is motivated to coach, but cannot get themselves out of a delivery cycle or make time to coach?
Well, then they're not committed, right? I mean, how we use our time is a symbol of our commitment. I mean, for example, here in the USA, I can name at least 3 young people who tell me they want to start a business. And when I look at how they're spending their time, they tell me they don't have time to do it, but I can tell you they sure do spend a lot of time playing Xbox. And so my conclusion is they're actually not committed to starting a business, right? Everybody can find 1 half hour or hour a week extra. Everybody. There's absolutely nobody in the world, at least in a potential coaching situation, who can't do that. And so what I'm going to say to them is, well, that's exactly why you need coaching. Because when we coach together, you're going to find ways to have more time. And maybe what I do is, maybe I haven't had to do this before, but I suppose I could give them, a time management tracking tool so that we could say, well, let's find that half hour. You track how you spend your time this week, and let's highlight opportunities to find that 1 hour. Or maybe we say, well, look, maybe this is about how you set boundaries with your manager. How can you set boundaries with your manager? Or maybe we say, look, let's do it on a morning of a weekend, or wake up an hour earlier. Everybody can find an extra hour. So to me, that's an unacceptable answer. What they're really saying is, I don't really want coaching. I'm not really coachable. And so I raise that. One of the things we have to do as a coach is we didn't talk about this here. We have to be on equal footing with our clients. We have to, and prospective clients, we have to say what needs to be said in a polite, diplomatic way. But if someone tells me they don't have time for coaching, I'm going to say, it sounds to me like you're really just not serious about solving whatever problem you say you have, because it's impossible that you can't find a half hour or an hour extra a week. It's just impossible. Anyone can do that. That's easy.
Thank you very much. And we have one last question from Brother Sami Al-Jui. What are the most common mistakes that are made by coaches?
The biggest mistake that a coach makes is thinking that that they know the answer. That's the biggest mistake, being arrogant and thinking they know the answer. So, when I listen, when a coach, well, I do it too, but perhaps you do. When we listen to someone, we're instinctively, because many of us come from executive and leadership backgrounds, we know the answer, right? We say, look, if I were in your shoes, this is what I would do. But the fact is that our client has a very different situation. They have a different style. They have different fears. They have different skills. They're actually accountable for their role. And so if we were to start getting directive and pushing them to our answer, we're making a mistake, because we're showing them more about who we are than learning about who they are. And so I think, getting directive, starting to ask yes, no questions. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Or can I tell you what I would do? Or here's what you need to do. That's not coaching. And that seems to be one really big mistake that I find that coaches do, is they just forget to relax, listen, and just ask the client, where do you want to go from here? What are your ideas? Tell me what you're thinking. That doesn't mean that we get wishy-washy, which is the other extreme that coaches have, where they don't do anything, and it's really an annoying conversation, a waste of time, of never-ending questions. I mean, at some point we have to say, I love it. I think we're at a good point here. Do you mind if I share an insight that I had? And you share it, but not as if it's the answer, but just something to talk about if you have something to contribute. So that's number 1 and 2. And number 3, I think, is there's a lot of coaches out there right now who are pushing pseudoscience, bad science, new age stuff. And I think that's a big mistake too. I think there's just a lot of coaches who just don't understand critical thinking and don't come from thinking about what the client needs first. They're instead pushing some sort of, I don't know, their own philosophy. And I think that's a third mistake that I see coaches making. Got to start with the client's results. What does the client want? What's their problem? How can we help bring value to them so that they succeed? That's super important as well. So those are the 3 mistakes, I think.
Well, thank you very much. And that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. So before I conclude, Mr. Andrew Neitlich, any quick concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
No, thank you all for your time. Again, I just think, coaching is taking off. It continues to grow around the world. And the reason it does is because it gets results and it's just a wonderful profession to have, and a super important tool to have as a leader and a manager. So I hope you all learned and enjoyed from today.
Well, thank you very much once again. I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for taking the time to deliver this webinar through our platform. So once again, thank you very much indeed. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it, so please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn about our upcoming programs and upcoming webinars, and equally to access the recorded versions. So with that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.